My wife kissed her boss in front of everyone and toasted, "This is what a real man feels like." Eyes on me. I didn't react, just smiled, grabbed my coat, and left. At 3:48 a.m., her boss's wife called her. "Your husband just sent me something. Check your email before you speak to anyone." My name is Daniel. I am 44 years old, and I had spent 17 years building something most people only talk about. Not the flashy kind of career that gets you featured in a magazine or earns you a plaque at a gala dinner, the kind that gets built in the dark. The kind where you show up before sunrise and leave after everyone else has already had dinner, and nobody notices until the day you stop. I managed supplier networks that moved $1.2 million in product every single quarter. I built vendor relationships over Christmas Eve phone calls, over handshake trust cultivated across years of quiet precision and follow-through. Every account I owned was held together by reputation, by reliability, and by the fact that when I said something would happen, it happened. No drama, no noise, just results. My wife, Claire, spent most of those 17 years spending the life I built and calling it a partnership. We were not broke. We were never broke, not even close. Our joint investment portfolio sat at just over $800,000 at the time any of this became relevant. We owned a boat that spent most of its life at the marina, looking expensive. We owned a condo in the city that Claire used for shopping trips. We owned our primary home, 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a kitchen she had renovated twice because the second set of countertops was not quite the right shade of white. I had structured our financial trust carefully over many years, each document layered deliberately, each clause placed with the same kind of quiet precision I brought to everything else in my life. Claire signed everything I put in front of her. She always did. She was usually halfway out the door when she did it, wine in one hand, phone in the other, treating my paperwork the way someone treats a minor inconvenience between social events. A form to initial so the boring man can go back to his boring spreadsheets. One of those documents was Form 11B, a financial disclosure addendum. Clause 6C specifically. She did not read a single word of it. I want you to understand what 17 years of a marriage actually feels like from the inside when you are the one carrying it. It does not end in a single dramatic moment. It ends in 1,000 small moments of being looked through. Claire laughing at a party while I stood 3 feet to her left, invisible. Claire on the phone with her friends describing our life together as something I should feel grateful to be included in. Claire rolling her eyes across the dinner table while I talked about a deal I had been working on for 6 months. The kind of deal that would pay for the next renovation she had already started planning in her head. You stop fighting about the small things because you realize the small things were never actually the point. The point was something much larger and much colder, and I had finally let myself see it clearly. The Monday before the company holiday party, I sat in my home office for 4 hours and built a folder. I am good at building things. That folder contained audio recordings pulled from 3 separate conversations. It contained screen captures of a message thread that stretched back 11 months. It contained a single PDF that laid out a timeline with dates, locations, and documentation that would have held up in any legal setting I chose to present it in. And it contained a 39-second video clip. I will come back to that clip. I compressed the entire folder, time-stamped it through a notarized digital service, and attached it to a draft email with one recipient, Marcus's wife. Her name was Renata. She had been at the company Christmas party the previous year, laughing at Marcus's jokes, touching his arm, believing entirely in a version of her life that was not real. I did not send the email that Monday. I saved the draft. I went to bed. I slept without difficulty because there is a particular kind of peace that comes when you have already made your decision and you are simply waiting for the moment to execute it. The company holiday party was the night everything became official. The venue was a hotel ballroom downtown, the kind of place that smells like carpet cleaner and ambition. There were chandeliers overhead that caught the light in ways that made everything look slightly more glamorous than it actually was. There were 112 people in that room, and most of them were doing what people do at these events, eating food they did not really want and talking about things they did not really care about while pretending both were wonderful. I was standing near the far end of the bar with a glass of sparkling water. Ice. Lime. No alcohol. I had not had a drink in 3 weeks, not because of any particular reason I had announced, but because I wanted to be precise. I wanted my memory of everything that was about to happen to be completely, surgically clear. Claire was across the room with Marcus. I had been watching the dynamic all evening with the detached calm of someone watching a documentary about a species they have already studied extensively. Marcus was the kind of man who wore confidence like a cologne he had applied too heavily. Big laugh, firm handshake. The sort of person who mistakes volume for substance. He had his hand on the small of Claire's back, and she was letting it rest there with a comfort that told me everything I needed to know about how long this had been happening while I was on Christmas Eve phone calls building the life she was currently enjoying. Then Claire grabbed him by the tie. It was deliberate. Everything about it was deliberate. The grab was slow enough to be a performance, not a reflex. She pulled him in and kissed him the way people only do when they want an audience, when the point is not the kiss itself, but the fact of being seen doing it. The room went sharp. The music did not stop, but it seemed like it did. That particular silence that moves through a crowd like a current, person to person, as heads turn and glasses pause halfway to mouths. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. I did not flinch. I did not move. I stood there with my sparkling water, and I watched it with the same measured calm I had brought to every quarterly audit, every contract review, every early morning when the rest of the world was still sleeping, and I was building something that mattered. Then she pulled back. She raised her glass. She looked directly at me across the length of that ballroom, past 110 other people, and she said it loud enough to bounce off every chandelier in the room. That line she chose was not just an insult. It was designed to be a humiliation, a public dismantling. She wanted the room to see me absorb it. She wanted to watch me shrink. What she did not know, what she had never once thought to consider in 17 years of dismissing my quiet work as something less than interesting, was that the man she was trying to diminish had already made every relevant move. 2 weeks earlier. In the same home office she walked past every evening without a second glance. I smiled, not a pained smile, not a performance of dignity, a genuine, settled smile that came from a place of complete resolution. I set my glass down on the bar with a soft, clean click. I picked up my coat from the chair where I had left it, folded it over my arm, and I walked out of that ballroom without rushing, without looking back, without a single word. I walked through the lobby, through the revolving door, out into the cold dark of the car park. Frost was already beginning to form on the windshields of the cars nearest the exit. My breath came out in small, visible clouds. I sat in my car for 90 seconds. I opened my phone. I navigated to the draft I had been sitting on for 2 weeks. I pressed send. Then I drove home, made tea, and went to bed. At 3:48 in the morning, Renata called Claire. I know the exact time because Claire told me later, in one of those conversations where she was still trying to understand the shape of what had happened to her. She said Renata's voice was completely flat, not angry, not crying, flat in the way that people go flat when they have absorbed something so large that emotion has not yet found a way through. What Renata said was very simple. Your husband just sent me something. Check your email before you speak to anyone. And then the line went quiet. Claire sat up in the bedroom of the house I had paid for, in the bed frame she had picked out, under the duvet cover she had ordered twice because the first one was also not quite the right shade, and she opened her laptop. The email was already there in her inbox. I had BCC'd her. Not because I needed her to see it that night, because I wanted her to understand the exact scope of what was coming before a single word of mourning arrived. The folder opened the same way it had opened on my screen when I built it. Audio first. The first recording was from a conversation at our kitchen table, one I had sat quietly through while looking at my phone, a phone that had been recording for 11 minutes and 43 seconds. Her voice was clear. The words were unambiguous. The second recording was from a phone call 3 months earlier. I had been in the next room. She had thought I was asleep. The screen captures came next. The message thread that stretched back 11 months. Time-stamped, unedited, complete. Then the PDF, the timeline, dates, locations, and a documentation chain that was legally clean, notarized, and thorough in the way that only someone who manages complex supplier contracts for a living understands how to be thorough. And then the last file. The 39-second video clip. This was the one she had not understood yet. This was the one she had been hovering over in the early morning hours, cursor positioned above it, some instinct telling her to pause. What was inside it was not from the party. It was not from any of the encounters I had documented over the preceding months. The 39-second clip was from 4 years earlier. A conversation she had never known I heard. A conversation in which she described, in her own voice, to a friend I will not name, her precise plan for how she intended to structure a future she had been designing while I was quietly building everything around her. Not an affair plan, something colder than that. A life plan in which I was a vehicle and not a destination. A funding mechanism and not a partner. Her words, not mine. 4 years of recorded clarity that recontextualized every document that preceded it in the folder. She sat there in the dark and she understood. The second incident had already happened by the time she woke up fully. Claire opened our investment dashboard at 11:12 in the morning and found nothing. Not a dip. Not a wire transfer notification. Not a balance she did not expect. A void. Every joint account. 0. She called Peter, our financial advisor, the one she had met exactly twice in 17 years, despite the fact that he managed the portfolio I had been building since before she had the condo. Peter explained it calmly, the way Peter explains everything, in that steady, measured voice that sounds like a man who has had this precise conversation before and knows that patience is the most useful tool he owns. He told her that she had co-signed a legal structure in September that transferred control of the joint assets to a sole beneficiary, trust the moment Clause 6C was triggered. Marital breach, documented, verified, irrevocable. She remembered signing the tablet. I had been making tea. The kitchen had smelled like bergamot, and she had been looking at her phone. She had initialed 4 places and handed the tablet back to me and asked if I was almost done because she had somewhere to be. She had never once asked what she was signing. The third incident was the vendors. By Tuesday morning, one vendor had paused all outgoing communications pending a review of account authority. By Wednesday, a second vendor flagged transition risk in their quarterly assessment. By Thursday, the third sent 2 words in a message that landed in Marcus's operations inbox like a stone dropped into still water. Pending audit. $3.4 million in first quarter product rollout. Completely frozen. Marcus convened an emergency meeting. He called it coordination. He used that word specifically when he spoke to their legal team. He was right. It was coordination. The difference between Marcus and me is that Marcus mistakes coordination for coincidence until it is already finished. What Marcus did not understand, what nobody in that company had ever bothered to understand because nobody in that company had ever truly looked at the quiet man who showed up early and left late, was that I had not been building those vendor relationships on behalf of the company in any way that was separable from me personally. Every account manager knew my name first. Every customs window had been opened by a phone call I personally made. Every seasonal pressure point had been navigated through a trust built over years of reliable follow-through. When I resigned with a 90-day notice that included a discretionary review clause buried in my original employment agreement, a clause that gave me authority over account transition timing in the event of what the document described as operational instability, those vendors did not freeze because I asked them to. They froze because I was the relationship, and without me, the relationship did not yet have somewhere else to live. Claire began calling me on Tuesday. I did not answer on Tuesday. She left 3 voicemails that escalated in tone from confused to frightened to something quieter and more specific that I recognized as the sound of someone who has finally stopped performing and is speaking plainly for the first time. I listened to all 3. I did not return the calls. My attorney, a woman named Sylvia, who had been my personal legal counsel for 6 years without Claire ever knowing the retainer existed, filed the initial divorce documentation on Wednesday morning. The filing was clean, complete, and based on a documentation chain so thorough that when Claire's attorney reviewed it on Friday, He called her and told her that contesting the financial structure would require her to prove she had been coerced into signing documents she had signed voluntarily, repeatedly, across 4 years, and that the evidence in the file suggested she would not find that argument easy to sustain. Marcus resigned from the company 3 weeks later. The vendor situation had made his position untenable in ways that had nothing to do with the personal circumstances the folder had introduced to his home life. Renata had forwarded that email to 2 people on the company's board of directors before the sun came up on the morning she received it. Not out of malice, out of a kind of stunned, sleepless need to tell someone the truth of what had been happening. Those 2 board members had their own views on what Marcus's judgment said about his fitness for the role he occupied. I did not engineer that outcome specifically. I simply built the folder thoroughly enough that the outcomes it produced were structurally inevitable once the folder was opened. I want to be precise about something, because precision matters to me, and it always has. I did not do any of this out of rage. I did not do any of this out of hurt, though hurt was present, in the way that cold is present when you step outside in January. It exists. You acknowledge it. You do not let it determine your direction. I did this because 17 years is a long time to build something carefully, and when you finally understand that the person sharing the building with you has been quietly planning to leave you with nothing, the ethical response is not to collapse. It is to be thorough. It is to be patient. It is to let every document speak for itself in the clearest possible language, in the clearest possible sequence, at the clearest possible moment. The divorce was finalized 9 months later. The financial settlement reflected the structure I had built, the investment portfolio, the condo, the trust assets, the vendor transition fee I had negotiated as part of my resignation package. All of it landed where I had positioned it to land, precisely, cleanly, without courtroom drama or extended litigation, because the documentation had been so complete that there was very little left to argue about. I kept the boat. Not because I particularly needed the boat. Because on the morning after the party, when I drove down to the marina before the sun came fully up and sat on the deck with a thermos of tea and watched the water move in that quiet gray way it moves before the world gets loud, I understood something I had been too tired to feel for several years. The silence was mine. The cold air was mine. The particular piece of a man who has done his work carefully and completely and can now simply sit and watch the water. That was entirely mine too. Claire moved into the condo. Marcus was not with her, for reasons that had become publicly clear in the weeks following the board's review of what Renata had shared. Claire got the condo because I structured it that way deliberately. It was the asset she would have fought hardest for, which meant it was the asset that made the rest of the negotiation move fastest. Sylvia had anticipated that. I had agreed with her assessment. I got a call from Peter about 14 months after the party. He told me the reconstituted sole beneficiary trust had crossed $1.1 million. I thanked him. I made another cup of tea. I sat back down at my desk, the same desk where I had built the folder, the same desk Claire had walked past for 17 years without once asking what I was working on, and I opened my current supplier network reports. I had started a consultancy 8 months earlier. 3 clients in the first quarter, 7 in the second, 12 in the third. I show up early. I leave late. Nobody notices until I stop. The difference now is that everything I am building is entirely, irrevocably, and permanently my own.